Hello everybody and welcome to the second part of What If Naruto Created His Own Village. I hope you enjoy this What If. Also don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Child of Hate. The story so far. Naruto, the outcast of the Namikaze clan, by his father's own hand, was handed over to his godfather, Orochimaru of the Sannin, with his twin sister when they were 3 years old. His twin sister, Naruko, was killed in front of him when they were 9 to toughen him up, but that also activated a Jujutsu called the Rinnegan, which he made sure to hide until he got a fair grasp on how to use it. After a little while he made use of his unparalleled control over gravity to break the head of his godfather against his seal-reinforced cage and ripping his soul out of his body, yet another ability of the Rinnegan, thereby giving Naruto all of the memories of Orochimaru of the Sannin. Naruto disappeared with all the other slaves from all the other chain labs all over the continent, and years later he returned as the king of the kingdom hidden in the sky, the Tsukai kingdom. He received news from his personal maid that his forces are ready to take over the world in his name, but in order to confirm he had them conquer 3 countries of his choosing, in his presence, lightning, spring, and water countries. Now after having flawless victory in all 3 countries and their respective shinobi villages, sans spring because they had no major ninja villages to note, he has called for a week-long festival in the kingdom to celebrate his forces and their accomplishments. It's a time to relax all the tension in the kingdom, a way to reassure his people that his soldiers are far superior and with nothing to fear, especially when there were 0 casualties from the Tsukai soldiers. Konoha has just realized of the Tsukai, but the king does not mind. He wanted them to know. Now the Hokage is trying to piece together who the supposed leader of the army of monsters is, as well as warn all the other countries to beware. Chapter 6. Any Jr., a high-pitched voice squeaked, making the boy she was calling wince and wiggle his pinky fingers in his ears. The boy looked at her briefly with his sky-blue eyes before he returned them to the scroll he was reading, an old report his father had allowed him to have on Minato's failed mission to rescue his older siblings from a mysterious kidnapper. Yes, he said as his lips twitched downwards at the amount of detail his father put into the report, from every step to the exact shoe size of the kidnapper. For the little Minato clone it was strange. I was thinking of having a team dinner at my place tomorrow. Mama even said that she won't mind. The girl clasped her hands before her and lilted on her heel nervously, blushing as the stoic boy flicked his eyes down to her from his perch on a tree branch and narrowing them briefly. Kakashi-sensei went on a mission, but you and Sai are still available. So, what do you say? Sure. Tell your mother to make a lot of ramen, please. The girl pumped her fist to her side and quickly straightened back up when Junior looked at her, his empty blue eyes analyzing her for something but returning back to the report. Where's Sai? I need to tell him what to say and what not to say when he's with my mama. Junior unrolled the old scroll a little more with his lips pursed. Right behind you. The girl yelped in surprise and leaped away from the widely grinning artist named Sai. Your detection skills need work. The blonde muttered as his eyes scanned the scroll. He had stopped counting how many times he had read and reread the scroll and drilled those that had gone on the mission for information. His father, the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha, Ibiki Marino, Inoichi Yamanaka, and finally Mabuki Haruno, the mother of his pink-haired teammate, who was busy yelling at the smiling black-haired boy. Junior was not able to completely grill the former Jounin shinobi turned civilian councilwoman for information, but this chance of team dinner at Sakura's house was too good an opportunity to pass. I don't know how you couldn't hear me. I've been standing behind you for 10 whole minutes. Sai said in a pleased voice. Sakura brought down her fist on the top of his head and yelled. You almost gave me a heart attack, you idiot. As the two bickered on Minato, Namikaze Jr. knew that his father resented his dead older siblings. That much was very obvious. Naruto and Naruko, that was what he said their names were, had their faces scratched out of every picture, and the birth records were taken out of the hospital and personally kept in the attic of the Hokage's mansion, away from the prying eyes of the general public but not away from the eyes of the only living child of the Yondaime. Junior knew that Naruto and Naruko were the joint holders of the 9-tailed fox, one of the soul and the other for the chakra. He knew that despite his father always ordering him to give up his investigation, the 13-year-old boy found it strange that everyone in Konoha, even those that went on the failed retrieval mission, found the twins to be the nicest, cutest kids you will ever meet, while Minato frequently called them vile beasts that should be slowly eaten away by termites and worms. And this was the man that led the retrieval team. It was, for lack of a better word, strange. Minato skillfully hid the hate from the people, because the people of the village had mourned the twins' death when the news had returned, but Junior was exposed to it every single day since the day he could make coherent thought. It was not something people widely knew, but from Junior's personality and his vast skill set for someone as young as him, the Yondaime had been putting him through the grinder. From sunrise to sunset, Minato Sr. had the boy exercise and practice and exercise, all over again. 10 years of being forced to live up to his father's high expectations not only took its toll on Junior's body but also his mind, specifically his personality. Sakura dusted down her red apron shirt and gave the mess of limbs on the ground a final kick to his torso before she asked her stoic blonde teammate. "Hey, shouldn't you, ask your dad before you come for the team dinner?" "He won't mind," the boy answered. Their team was on a break from missions because Junior was still healing from his wounds from fighting Sasuke a few days ago. His ribs were still pretty sore and the fracture on his collarbone had been sealed up. His only problem was the itchiness of his bandages and how much he sweated anytime he was wearing a shirt over them. That was why he only had on a white with red flames jacket over his torso and bandages wound up over his trunk. "Are you sure?" she insisted. Junior jumped over the question and leaned back, flipping off the tree branch and landing on his feet like a cat before he straightened up and zipped up his jacket. "Come on, let's go and see Sasuke." Sai got back to his feet and minutely frowned. "Why?" "I want to look through the Uchiha records on something personal." During the course of his investigation, Inoichi the Yamanaka clan head had let out that Itachi and Shursue Uchiha were once the twins' caretakers. The Minato clone wanted to know who his siblings were, if there was even a slight possibility that they were still alive, and gain closure for how broken his childhood was. After watching the interactions between Sasuke and Itachi, before the latter defected, Yugao and Ami Yuzuki, and Asuma, Lia, and Aizen Sarutobi, and how close these siblings were, he wanted to have that feeling, because no matter how detached Junior's personality was and how ruthless his decisions were, he still wanted to know what being loved felt like. People said that the twins had love in their heart to spare, but these people chose to stay away from them like the plague out of fear for the wrath of their father. He wanted to have some of that love. He needed some of that love, or his career as a Konoha shinobi would be called into personal scrutiny. "How are you sure he will let you? For all we know, he's still mad you brought him back," Sai pointed out, and Sakura hesitantly agreed. Junior folded his arms under his chest and his eyebrows lowered. "We'll just have to see, don't we?" He spun around on his heel and began his trek to the Uchiha compound. His teammates quickly followed after. A few hours later. The kingdom hidden in the sky. Magi Haruai Gamatomo, head of the Fuinjutsu division, rushed down the stairs of her apartment house situated in the soldier accommodation/barracks district of the Sukai Kingdom, wearing a white and black skirt and a bright red and black long-sleeved shirt without her usual backpack. The platinum underarmor symbolizing her rank and her was still present and glinting under the lights, each one dimmed as she passed by mental command. Her mint green hair was tied up into a ponytail, which she kept on adjusting as she ran. She stopped at the bottom stairs, her eyes quickly looked around and made sure that the furniture in the parlor and living room were in place before she moved out of the house. She pulled up the sleeves of her shirt and clapped her hands. The platinum armor on her body shimmered and disappeared from sight, and even though it was still very much there, she couldn't feel much like if she had it in sight. Her metal boots changed into white sneakers and deep red knee socks. The feeble girl straightened her skirt and closed the door with a click. She took in a deep breath, sparing a smile to the soldiers that rushed past her house, chattering excitedly and dragging each other to other parts of the kingdom to see more of the kingdom-wide festival. She cleared her throat and glanced to her side. On the left side of her apartment's porch, where a woman that looked to be in her late 60s sat in a rocking chair, glassy-eyed and motionless. The green-haired girl walked to the woman and gently kissed the side of her temple. The woman remained unresponsive. I'll be going out for the festival, Granny," she said, and the woman only breathed out. "A friend from the medical division would be coming every once in a while to check on you." She tried not to let her spirits drop when she got no reply. The woman she referred to as Granny was once her cellmate during their days in Sound. She had been tortured into a vegetable state by the sadistic snake summoner. Karen had made it her mission to help fix what Orochimaru had caused, but a cure was slow in arriving because they still couldn't find what was wrong with her. The girl smiled sadly and sharply looked up when she heard her name being called. She beamed at the questionably sane head of the Inventions Division. Nirvana was dressed in bright red khaki pants and a black sleeveless hoodie shirt with her metal boots now in the form of white sneakers, like with Magi. The inventor stood with Nora, head of the Scout and Retrieval Division. This time the woman was in a white mask, wearing a gold and black jumpsuit and red trainers. The masked woman was eagerly jogging on the spot and beckoning the youngest division head to come, barely being held back from hurtling deep into the kingdom to the festival. The Soldier Accommodations Division was a wide district that stretched around the kingdom, leaving more than enough space for nature and fields to flourish, making it that the division took up 40% of the outer side of the kingdom. This was so that when it was time to defend the kingdom from internal and external aggression they would be able to do so as quickly as possible. "Hurry up, Shorty!" Nirvana yelled to the girl and did a double take when she noticed Magi's granny sitting there. "Oh, and good morning, Granny." The woman didn't reply, but the inventor knew why and chose not to take offense. The green-haired girl ran over and the three females ran out of the district together. As they got closer they had to wade through the gaggle of Hyper-Tsukai citizens that were moving from tent to tent, playing the games and winning prizes. They looked around with wide eyes at all they were going to be doing for the next 7 days. Magi hopped in place before she grabbed hold of the two older girls' forearms and pulled them towards a stand where various large stuffed animals. As she got there, another person dragging the arm of an amused woman with him there. It was a purple-haired, black-eyed boy that looked to be in his early teens in a pair of black trousers and a black shirt. The woman had black hair and was in a casual green dress. The boy had a small smile on his face as he looked at the stand, where a widely grinning, pot-bellied man stood with his arms akimbo behind the counter. The game was fairly simple: use a purple rubber ball to hit down a tower of 11 bottles. The females looked at the boy as he bowed to them. "Hello." Nora waved slightly. "Hey. I see you like stuffed animals." "Not really, I just want to try all the games before the festival is up," was the reply from the boy as his guardian paid for 3 balls. He graciously took the balls and stuck out his tongue from the side of his mouth and wound his right arm back. He lifted his left knee as he dragged his arm back. The ninjas nodded at his form, and let his arm fly forward, releasing the ball as he did so. The ball clipped off the first 3 bottles at the top and the child bit his bottom lip in barely surprised excitement. Then he looked at the other teen with mild shock. "I'm sorry, did you want to have a go?" "My name is Magi," she said in a shy smile to the almost expressionless boy. "Call me Jinji," he said and pointed his thumb to his chest, before pointing to the woman over his shoulder. "And this is my friend, Gammy." The woman nodded to them. "So, do you want to try?" He tossed a ball to her and she deftly caught it. "Don't worry about paying, Gammy here works in the palace and I just got into the academy." He said it proudly as he puffed out his chest. The women looked at him, tickled by his attitude. They didn't have enough in them to reveal that all 3 of them were platinum-ranked division heads. "That's nice," Magi said with a slight bow, hiding her nervous smile. She was above rank to this boy. It wouldn't be nice if she brought his spirits down. She idly tossed the ball between her hands as she walked closer to the counter. "How old are you, Jinji?" 16. "How about you?" Magi rolled the ball in her palms before she drew her right hand back and thrust it forward, like she was palm striking the air, but instead a ball was released. The purple ball tore forward and crashed against the bottles, toppling it all down. "I'm 15. She pointed a massive purple salamander and thanked the men as she took it, hugging it close to her body. Jinji took the last ball and threw it again, this time tumbling the pyramid of bottles. He hummed and drummed his fingers on the wooden counter as he carefully looked at each stuffed animal, before he picked out a cartoonish-looking scorpion. The purple-haired boy took the toy and held it under his arm. "Why a scorpion?" "I have an uncle in the army that likes scorpions. He really likes scorpions." He added the last part with a mild shiver. "Oh." The 15-year-old girl scuffed her foot on the ground. The other platinum ranks behind them looked at each other, then to the boy's caretaker. "Well, see you later, Magi." Jinji said as he turned around, about to run to the next game stand where people were surrounding. Would you mind if we tagged along? Nirvana said with her eyes squinting at the boy's back, ignoring the elbow jab from Nora and the wide-eyed look Magi was sending her. How about we test our strengths over there? She motioned to a sparsely populated test of strength stand, where a short, grizzled-looking man stood with his arms crossed, observing the others that were trying to heft up the mallet and bring it down. I don't think I'm strong enough to carry that thing, Jinji said and began walking away. Gamma shrugged and followed him. Wait. I am. If you win then I'll be your slave for a week, she shouted and the boy stopped abruptly. You hurt me. Why do you want me to test my strength so much? Don't listen to her, she gets impulsive when she's hungry. Magi interrupted and began pushing away the inventor. No, I know that look, Jinji said as he looked over his shoulder, still gripping his stuffed scorpion under his left arm. She thinks I'm an imposter. I didn't say that. Nirvana tried to say with her hands waving for the boy to calm down, her eyes large like dinner plates that he had caught on so quickly. You don't need to say it, he said before she could finish. Look, you look like someone I know. That's all. She trailed off as Jinji fully turned around, flashing a quick knowing smirk to her. My lord, the purple-haired boy shook his head with a wink. No, my name is Jinji. You must be confusing me with someone else. Those that walked around them unashamedly eavesdropped on their conversation, though they were not able to grab the main points with the small hint the king of Sukai had dropped. You didn't know? Nora fiercely whispered into the multicolored girl's ear. I did. I just wanted to confirm, she muttered back, not so quietly. Magi though tried not to look like she was about to faint. Do you want to tag along with us? Gammy always wants me to be around friends. He handed the stuffed toy to his disguised maid. All the king's royal guards were on the break Naruto had ordered them to go on, to celebrate in the festival, so the king did not have any gold-rank soldiers following his every move in hidden positions, just his reliable combat maid, Shinakora, who was wearing a black wig and chose to don something more casual so as not to draw attention while Naruto had on a purple wig and black contact lenses to hide his godly Rinnegan. He drew the line on applying makeup. Hiding in a genjutsu might draw the attention of a few people, especially the soldiers that had spent the majority of their lives studying illusions in the academy. The females fought the urge not to bow to their master, who was obviously in disguise so as to hide his rank. Yes, my Sir Kingahem Jinji. Magi replied on behalf of the others. The majority of the festival took place around the royal palace of the king, which was placed on a highly raised platform at the very center of the kingdom, giving the king a good view of his whole kingdom. This didn't mean that places at the edge of the kingdom were left out of the festivities. In the soldier accommodations district the bars there open and all the drinks were free, as by the king's order. Naruto would pay for the drinks from his treasury. The king looked around with his mighty but hidden Rinnegan eyes and ducked into a dark alley. His subordinates followed after him, not drawing too many eyes besides the undercover police officers, who recognized the 3 division heads and left it be, though they kept a vigilant ear out if they needed help. A police officer never truly went on a break, even if Naruto had ordered for their vigilance to cool down a bit. Shinakora Origami stayed at the mouth of the alley, just shaded by the darkness and allowed the other 3 females to pass by. The king hopped onto a dumpster and sat down. He leaned back and looked up to the sky. It was about 5 in the afternoon and the weather was very pleasant, caressing his skin with warm breathes and making the Rinnegan king sign in comfort. He closed his eyes and placed his hands behind his head. You have questions? He assumed, in the females standing before him, their king sitting on a fairly clean dumpster. You're free to ask. They couldn't hold back the impulse to place their hands over their hearts and tilt their heads down to the ground, and despite having his eyes closed and supposedly unaware of their movement, the king still puffed out an air of frustration. Why are you in disguise, my lord? Nora asked first. Is your life in danger? Jinji, Naruto corrected for the second time and answered. And no, I want to truly enjoy this festival without worrying about being bowed to left and right. I will be fairly busy during the course of this festival and the first day might be the only time I have to really relax. Why not pose as a higher-ranked official than a new academy student? Nirvana queried. Naruto shrugged. I just felt like it. Sir Jinji, if I may, I do not think it is proper for one such as you to walk around without proper protection. Nora said, putting her foot down with a mildly trembling voice. Naruto's lips twitched down, but he kept his eyes closed. Are you assuming that we have an assassin after my head in my own home? Among my own people? The masked woman sputtered. No. I did not mean to assume dash. Are you saying that if anything remotely bad happened, and that is a big if, then my police officers are not more than enough to contain it? SSSS, sir. Are you saying that I do not have the ability to protect myself? He sat up abruptly and the shaking woman fell onto her knees immediately, making sure her hand was still over her heart and her eyes were on the ground in subservience. That after everything you have seen me do without lifting my hands I still need constant security. The fact that he spoke in a calm, low voice was what sent chills down the spines of the division heads. There was no oppressive force on their shoulders, there was no bloodlust in his voice, he did not even glare at them. He sat forward, propping his hands on the wide metal lid of dumpster at his side. That my servant, Shinakora, is not fully capable of defending me if I ask her to. I apologize, my lord Naruto. IIST stepped out of L line. It will not happen again. Naruto stared her stoically for a few seconds before he leaned back again and looked at the clear sky. No, it's fine. You are just looking out for my safety, but I would prefer it if you did not think of me like some sort of regular grounder daimyo that is heavily dependent on others to defend him, he said, speaking of how the daimyos and leaders on the ground mostly had no prior knowledge of combat and hid behind their soldiers. You are not a grounder, sir, you are the great king of the Tsukai kingdom. The greatest and mightiest leader the world has ever seen and will ever see. Nirvana piped up, trying to quell whatever anger was in her leader that he did not make them see. Magi bobbed her head in agreement. You do not need protection, my king, we your people need your protection. They were trying to stoke his ego so he didn't crush the head of Scout and Retrieval, Nora, into a bloody paste. It wasn't working because the king was not angry in the first place. It's fine, Naruto said as he waved for them to calm down. But when I am in this disguise I am Jinji the academy student, understood? Yes, Jinji. Good. Now, I trust in the abilities in the Inventions Division and Fuinjutsu Division to have the perfect device to protect our home from external aggression of any kind, whether it be jutsu, bombs, or physical attacks. The floating island kingdom was being kept in the air by strong solar-powered engines that powered massive, heavily muffled fans that constantly spun so that the kingdom was able to stay in one place at a time unless those that worked in the controls were ordered to move the kingdom. These engines were hidden behind Fuinjutsu that summoned clouds to hide them and cover the sound from the notice of the grounders, also swaddling the kingdom in clouds and sunlight to hide its presence. If by chance they were found, then there was a translucent bubble of chakra that covered the island kingdom, able to take even the strongest lightning attack constantly until soldiers arrived to repel them. I have looked at each security measure myself and I have personally approved them, or have I not? You have, Jinji. Magi replied. Remember this, I was the one that assembled people to fight for my cause, but that is not all. I am obligated to protect them, not because it is my duty as a king but also because I want to protect them. I would use my last breath to ensure all of your safety, despite how selfish my ambitions are. Your ambitions are our ambitions, Nora said. And we are forever honored you regard your people to such extents, Nirvana added. The Rinnegan king opened his eyes, showing the black contact lenses there, and sat up. Well, I think this is more than enough of this talk, go and enjoy the festival. Do you mind if we accompany you? Magi asked, watching as their king deftly hopped off the dustbin and dusted down the back of his black pants. When he looked at her with slightly narrowed eyes she hastily said. So that we can enjoy the festival with you, my king, I mean Jinji. Fine, try and keep up, he said, and a tiny, excited smile spread on his face and he raced out of the alley with Gammy, still holding the stuffed scorpion the king had won. The three platinum ranks had to push their way through the crowd of people as they too ran about, playing and eating all the festival offered, most of which would be paid by the king through the civilian division, while the others, like the throwing games, were paid by those that participated. It was all a blur of color and laughter as they chased their king as he rushed from game to game, food court to food court, actually letting himself go as much as his upbringing allowed and sparing a small smile on his face and a thrilled glow in his coal-black eyes. At one moment they were all trying a dart game and another Nirvana was in a dance competition against a dark-skinned man with 4 arms, then it all slurred together and Gammy tried her hand eating a spicy pepper, making the gloating chef gape in horror when the disguised soul of the Nine Tails swallowed 10 flaming hot peppers with a large, toothy grin on her face. The group laughed uproariously when the men grew red in the face after taking a single bite, thinking his peppers were defective, before they all ran away as he yelled profanities at them. Jinji almost got into a fistfight with a well-built man after said men brazenly groped Gammy, if not for the timely intervention of Magi and Nora, who swept in and knocked sense into the men before Naruto could lose his cool and suck out his soul. The mood took a slight dip after that until they ran into Satoshi, the head of rescue and support, and Mora, headhunter ninja for the kingdom. Both were wearing casual sleeveless shirts and black pants, though instead of sneakers or trainers they wore black boots. They waved over the group and did a double take when they saw Naruto in his Jinji disguise, though they silently, mutually, agreed to go along with it, even if they decided to still give him the respect of a king. Mora and Nora immediately threw their arms over each other's shoulders and the ever-so-happy Satoshi and Nirvana began chattering amongst themselves. Jinji walked in the middle but even still he dictated where to go by subtle bodily cues. "Hey, Jinji," Satoshi said as he turned back to the disguised king. "Would it be okay if I left to go and see Hamato at the Grey Tusk Bar back in the SA, Soldier Accommodations, Division? We have some important things to talk about." "Is it something I should be made aware of?" Naruto prodded, idly realizing that it was 9 at night and the street lights were on, illuminating the still busy streets. He noticed a few soldiers running on the roofs and stationing themselves to watch over them, his eyes twinkled at their intuition. The smile on the man's face never wavered. "Yes. Tomorrow." Naruto nodded and motioned for the men to come closer, whispering in his ear. "Please do so. I'd like it if you and Hamato reported to my office with Indra. I have a request to ask him." "Yes, Sir Jinji," the man said with a subtle nod of his head. He soon melted into the background and vanished in the crowd of people. The king saw some of the police patrol back and forth in the crowd, some dragging with them handcuffed people that had been causing trouble. As the night went on the throng of people thinned and the patrol increased, until Naruto became tired and decided to return back to his palace. Naruto's eyes burst open and he quietly groaned as the sleep gently left him. He tried to sit up but a weight on his chest kept him in place. He looked down and blinked twice when he saw a white head snuggling close to his chest. His eyes ventured to his right and there was a mop of rainbow-colored hair hugging his arm and then to his right there was mint-green hair. All 3 females moaned tiredly when he shifted his arms, making him realize that he had them wrapped around their shoulders, pulling them close to him under the thick blanket. The king breathed gently and his fingers twitched, the girls were lifted off his body and he levitated upwards a little, his control over gravity pulled him out and he allowed them to drop gently onto the bed. The Rinnegan holder landed on his feet silently, sparing a quick look to the girls before he proceeded to his bathroom. He passed by the mirror and stopped when he got a glimpse at himself. His red hair was frizzy and all over the place, there was a cow lick on his forehead from Kami knows what, he had many red kisses on his chest and mid-abdomen and his black pants were frayed at the feet. The teen rubbed out the last vestiges of sleep from his eyes and walked into his bathroom. He had a crazy, partly memorable night, like with a few other nights he had with some of the women he trusted. This trust was for them to keep their bedroom relations a secret. It wasn't the first time he had invited more than one female into his room and with his almost insatiable Uzumaki libido it would most definitely not be the last. It was good that he didn't just ask any random woman but rather people that had sworn an oath of secrecy mainly due to how close they worked to his office. Shinakura was usually the one that participated in the nightly, and sometimes daily, romps in the bedroom but he had sent her out on an errand in the kingdom as they reached the palace. The king stepped out of the bathroom, steam billowing in his wake as he rubbed his hair with a towel. He passed the bed where the girls lay on, Nirvana, Nora and Magi, and entered his wardrobe. He emerged in a short-sleeved red shirt and pants, his obsidian under armor now in plain view. He opened the door and passed by his maid as he walked out, the woman followed behind him, making sure to close the door to hide the decency of the exhausted females sleeping in the king's bed. "Indra and the others are waiting for you in your office," the fox said to her king. Naruto nodded and proceeded up the stairs, replying to the greeting of the palace workers that went around throwing curtains open and dusting down his furniture. Outside the palace, the kingdom was already awake and ready for another day of festivities. Two silver ranks snapped into attention at his arrival and opened the door for him. Naruto entered and they closed the door behind him, though allowing Shinokora to enter as well. The office of the king of the Tsukai kingdom had 4 sides and the solid mahogany desk. The carpet was deep red and the paint on the wall was white with gold lines on the corners and the entire ceiling. The whole of the wall to the right of the desk was a large window, showing the kingdom. It was an unassuming office by Naruto's request, but only until he decided what to fill it with. Indra, head of frontline soldiers, Hamato, head of intelligence and interrogation, and Satoshi, head of rescue and support, stood at attention before his desk in their combat uniform. Indra had the kubikiri sheathed on his back. Naruto smoothly sat down and relaxed in his chair. Before we begin, Satoshi and Hamato. He motioned for them to speak. Hamato was the one to speak up. We were discussing on what you wanted us to do during our last division head meeting here in your office. Naruto, in understanding, recalling that he had tasked the division heads to prepare for what would happen after the festival. He also assigned specific functions to specific members. To the 2 heads he gave them the task of keeping watch of the countries he had already conquered. He told them to go on. Our tracking chip tells us that Madame Koyuki is currently meeting Hatake Kakashi. He unsealed a scroll from his palm. This is what they discussed so far. Do you want us to have Kakashi and his team taken care of? He gave the conversation manuscript to Naruto and he opened it. His smile increased fractionally and he handed it back to Hamato, his fully exposed Rinnegan glowing with joy. Perfect. That is exactly the message I want Konoha to get. Speaking of messages. He pulled out a drawer from his desk and riffled through the neatly filed papers there before pulling out a single sheet. He gave it to Hamato. Have that sent to all the leaders of the countries and hidden villages we haven't yet conquered, including Konoha and Fire Country. Make sure you assign them to their respective leaders, not just generally assigning them. I want them to feel like I'm speaking to them personally. If I may, my lord. Indra piped up. Yes. Do you want them to wait for a reply? Naruto hummed before he shook his head. No. I made sure to have every possible outcome of them reading the letter accounted for. If they choose right or wrong is up to them. He perched his elbows on his desk and his head on his thumbs. I want at least a squad silver-ranked intelligence and interrogation soldiers to deliver them, seeing as they are best at sending out information and they should be able to defend themselves if things get rough, though I doubt they will be detected. I'm honored by your thoughts, my lord. Hamato muttered with a polite bow. Naruto sat forward prompting his loyal till death soldiers to stand straighter. Don't worry about it. Now, I'm sure you are all aware of the exact details in the fealty agreement scroll. They nodded. That means each village head or daimyo are allowed to give as much information as possible to those that ask but are not allowed to lend aid in a revolt on my rulership. He looked each of them in the eye as he paused. That means that the ninjas from Konoha that division head you of espionage and infiltration and division head Hamato have reported that are in Spring are not to be attacked, and this goes for Spring as well, until Spring give ninjas to aid in the revolt. Though I'm sure Madame Koyuki has read the agreement deal in detail. Understood, sir. They all said. Do you 3 know why? Yes, sir. Just so we don't have any confusion in the air, can someone tell me why I want the world to know about us before we strike? Hamato spoke on behalf of the others. The Tsukai Force's individual strength, technological, seal and medical advancements have given us a big advantage over the grounders. If we were to march in with all we have, then they will stand no chance and submit much too quickly. And we want them to prepare as much as possible so that after we defeat they will realize that no matter what, the Tsukai kingdom will always be great. He faced Indra. Will you be free by noon? Yes, sir. If you will be busy with your duties I won't mind. Naruto insisted. I just have a routine weekly inspection of the barracks and the accommodations district, and a meeting with Division Head Karen of Medical for the report on the well-being of your soldiers. What is it you want me to do, sir? I want to have a quick spar to see if my skills have dulled. I do not think they have dulled. Indra said as he momentarily lost his cool. His king wanted to fight against him. It was cause to panic for him. Naruto waved for the men to relax, even though the only indication that he was panicking was the light dusting of perspiration on his forehead. It's just a quick eye and body check. Do not worry, I will not go overboard. Push those scheduled inspections and meetings down to this evening. I want that spar soonest. I am humbled you want to fight me, my lord. You may all go. The platinum ranks bowed and left his office. Shinakura, I have a mission for you. The maid stepped before his desk and bowed, awaiting his command. What is it you want me to do, my king? I want you to personally contact my spy in Suna to check if she would need help taking care of the Sand siblings if Suna decides not to submit. You know of her pride, so if she insists that she needs no help, then stay regardless. Do you want me to have another of your maids to work in my place? He nodded and the soul of the fox in human form bobbed her head and left to go to her room to get ready for her time in the desert. Oh. An hour later. The Hokage's office. Hokage's tower. Kanahagakure no Sato. Minato rubbed his forehead. Kakashi and his team must have reached spring by now. He tiredly stalked to his desk. His assistant greeted him and he flippantly answered with a wave to her. His eyes suddenly became clearer at the letter seated safely on his Hokage's working table. He suspiciously looked around his office, not seeing anything out of place besides the widely open window, allowing in the cool morning air into his workplace. His bright blue eyes stayed on the window, his left hand inching behind him but stopping when the shadow hidden behind the curtain lightened. Strange. He pulled out a small scroll from his white with red flames cloak and tossed it onto the scroll on his desk. It burst into white smoke and a minute later he blew away the smoke with a low-level windjutsu, revealing the scroll to be untouched and unaffected, meaning it was safe and without any traps on it. He swiped it off his desk and unrolled it. To Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. I am Naruto, the king of the Tsukai kingdom and leader of the Tsukai forces that successfully invaded lightning, spring, and water countries. If you are not aware of this fact, then you may go and inquire about them. The daimyos and kages are permitted to give as much detailed information they want. Those three countries, all respectable foes in their own right, were no match for my soldiers. They all fell in 2 days. That means that I invaded 2 countries in 1 day and the third was a few hours after sunrise. If this is not enough to convince you of our might, then, again, you may ask the daimyos and kages of the places I conquered. I am certain they will tell you of how easily we took them down, and if my assumptions are correct, then Spring Country will have video surveillance. I made sure they weren't taken out as I walked in. My orders are simple. If you wish not to be trampled under the might of me and my army, then unseal the fealty agreement scroll from this letter and sign it, but if it is shredded to pieces, then I will immediately be notified and I will assume that your country wishes not to swear fealty to me, but if you sign it, then we will pass by in 6 days to collect it. Not signing it all will also be taken as defiance and I will subdue defiance or destroy it if I see fit. Do not forget the lives you hold accountable to. If you disagree to swear fealty to me, then I will have no other option to come to there myself to show you exactly why I am king of the Tsukai kingdom. I will give you 6 days to decide the fate of your people. The fate of your people lies in your hands. The king of the Tsukai kingdom. Lord Naruto. Minato slowly lifted his eyes off the letter and hissed in fury. So you're still alive, you little piece of dog shit. He unknowingly began pulsing killer intent, pressing down on the ANBU that hid around his office as well as making his assistant cry in pain. Like hell I will submit to you. The Yondaime Hokage tore up the letter, shredding the pieces with wind chakra. The blonde man threw away the tiny pieces and yelled. I'll kill you myself. Chapter 7. Spring hasn't changed much, Kakashi noted as he waltzed through the capital gates quickly. His dull one eye looked around from under his dog ANBU mask. He signed over his shoulder to his team of 4 jogging behind him. Go and gather information. Meet me back here in 30 minutes. They saluted and disappeared in different directions to ask the citizens of the country the detail of the invasion from their perspective and compare it with that of their captain when they met, so that would at least understand what sort of threat they were up against. As the Sharingan holder looked around, he didn't notice any major change in the capital to signify that it was overrun besides the large flag that waved at the top of the Spring Daimyo's palace under the country's flag. The flag had a deep red background with the kanji for sky written in golden strokes. There were also scuff marks on the ground from obvious struggle, and as he came closer to the palace he saw that there were blacksmiths mending the hinges of the great door, even if it didn't seem like it had been ripped off its hinges but rather they were checking and refortifying it. The masked man entered the palace, ignoring the workers that ran about to reorganize their lives, and proceeded to the woman sitting on the throne. Koyuki had a sad frown etched onto her beautiful face, and the actress closed her eyes at the memory of how easily her personal guards were dispatched. She opened them when she heard a polite cough. "Greetings, Lady Koyuki. I am Dog of the Konoha Anbu. The Yondaime sent me here to see if your country still needs help fighting those Tsukai forces." "Just you," she said with a raised eyebrow. "Several squads of my comrades are stationed outside the country." The woman sighed and slumped a little more into her throne. "Regardless of that, it is too late, they have already gone." "Lady Koyuki, if I may," her fingers twitched on her armrest, telling him he was permitted to speak. "Can I know more about this Tsukai forces so that we can better know how to defeat them?" The actress was silent for a few long moments, staring at the dog-masked man with gradually widening eyes. "They cannot be defeated. The sole reason my messenger even reached Konoha is because their king was merciful enough to allow it." Her eyes dulled at the memory of the almighty king of the army of monsters. "Their king, he was able to crush the heads of 3 of my guards with nothing but the air," and without a serious thought, she pointed at her neck, where a thin red line circled around it like a necklace. "He did this to me, without even coming near me." "Lady Koyuki, this all does not mean he cannot be killed. He is still human." "No, he is not. None of the Tsukai soldiers are human, and I believe the civilians are not human as well." "I'm sorry ma'am, but we still need information. Can you tell us what you know about the Tsukai king? The man and his forces didn't loot the kingdom or usurp the daimyo and take control, then it was less an invasion and more of attacking a country because they felt like it. Making it more or less a hobby." The woman wilted into her seat and rubbed her still sore neck. "He said his name is Naruto dash." The man's eye became alarmed and he burst out. "Naruto." Koyuki looked at the Hataki with squinted eyes, the rubbing motion on her neck slowed to a stop. "Are you familiar with that name? Describe him, please." He had red hair and pale skin. It was like he did not know how to express himself, because I could see he wanted to smile or grin more but he didn't know how to. "I know this because I'm an actress." She then snapped her fingers. The security cameras inside the palace were still working after he left. I think he didn't know about them. She snapped her fingers and a white-haired boy in his late teens wearing thick glasses and casual clothing ran up to his daimyo and presented a small handheld device with a flat screen that was just as big as both of his hands cupped together. The woman thanked the boy and tapped the screen twice. It lit up and she swiped across it once with her pointer finger and tapped again. She closed her eyes and gave the masked Konoha ninja the device. It was a video recording from all 4 corners of the ceiling. When the door opened up easily after all the materials used to block it had magically shifted aside, dozens of soldiers in red shirts and black pants with golden underarmor stomped in and stood by the walls. A woman in rainbow-colored hair then marched in a swivel to her right, placed her hand over heart in sync with the other soldiers and tilted her head a little bit down, though the soldiers by the walls didn't do so but rather kept their eyes on the defiant Spring Daimyo and her guards. Then Naruto walked in and Kakashi's heart almost stopped in shock. He held back from stumbling away as he watched as each step the boy took towards the woman rattled the building to its very core and the head of a guard exploded in a geyser of blood and brain matter. The actress's face turned a deep shade of gray as an invisible force grabbed hold of her neck. Naruto took his time walking to her, blowing up to more heads before the guards finally got a clue that he was the cause and prepared to attack but were swiftly killed by the guards lining the walls with various weapons to their heads. The golden-armored soldiers dropped their hands. Somehow Kakashi felt like these soldiers lining the walls were mostly ninjas. The rejected son of the Yondaime Hokage stopped before the woman and gently placed his hand on her head, releasing her from his hold. There was no sound but the war veteran as well as Star Shinobi could feel chills run up and down his spine at the mildly amused face of the actress. He was telling me that he knew about my message to Konoha, the woman said from her throne, her face in her hands and shivering at the memory. That he predicted I would send on, but he wanted Konoha to get the message. She looked up to the Hatake, tears devoid in her eyes and her face eerily calm. And I had a feeling that he could just as easily kill them with a snap of his fingers. The men silently listened as he kept watching the thought-to-be-dead son of the fourth. Naruto said something over his shoulder. He knew I was about to stab him and he still didn't kill me. The man's hands shook. This wasn't the little bundle of happiness he knew, this was a bitter, sadistic, evil shadow of the child he used to visit every once in a while. He heard from the Yondaime that the twins had been killed and he didn't question it, but something in him told him that one of the twins had indeed died. Naruko. It was very obvious that Naruto treasured his sister. Can I have a copy of this video? By all means. The woman said, and the same white-haired boy took the device. Kakashi scratched his chin with a deep frown on his face. I need to report this to Minato-sensei. He idly took the tape of the video and rushed out of the palace. He met up with his team, all of which wore grim expressions under their masks, and ran out of spring. Oh. The Tsukai Forces Arena Alpha. The military barracks. The Tsukai Kingdom. Indra Watashi drew the kubikiri from his back and placed it on his shoulder. Small drops of sweat grew on his head as he looked across the training ground, a red-haired teen that stood with his hands to his side and a wistful smile on his face. Make sure you don't hold back, Indra. Naruto called to the platinum rank. I will try my best, my lord. The head of the frontline soldier said as he bent his right knee and held the handle of his sword with both of his hands, though still keeping the massive blade on his right shoulder. Naruto, though, didn't move from his position. Arena Alpha was a place where silver ranks were tested to see if they were ready to be promoted to gold ranks, so needless to say that the place was so fortified with reinforcement seals that there had to be a separate seal set in place to not destabilize the floating island kingdom. The other promotion arenas, Beta and Gamma, were less reinforced because bronze to silver and copper to bronze respectively, because the abilities of the lower ranks were a bit less dangerous than the higher ranks. The other division heads watched from the sidelines, on a row of seats set apart for them and the king of the kingdom to watch over the promotion exams, this time though their king was the one fighting, or rather, having a quick eye and body check. Indra grit his teeth and ran to his king, moving so quickly he created a faint black blur of motion that raced towards Naruto, who still hadn't moved. Barely a feet away from him, Naruto's black with red ringed eyes pulsed and the world moved to a slow slur. The eagerly watching group of division heads slowed down with it until it all stopped. Naruto observed the men before him, bringing down the head cleaver to split his head open with a stoic expression and a rigid posture. The king pursed his lips and his eyes moved around, noticing that the dust in the air froze completely. He walked behind the men and his legs shot to the back of Indra's knees, forcing him to fall onto his knees, but even still Naruto's quick eyes still saw everything in stillness, like he had mentally clicked reality's pause button. The Rinnegan king then swung his foot and nailed the swordsman on the side of his head, but instead of sending him into the wall, the king continued the motion and brought down the division heads to meet the ground in a ground-shaking thud. Naruto stepped back and allowed his eyes to see things like any other person. The division heads collectively blinked in shock when they saw that at one moment Indra was about to open up the head of their king and then the next their king stood over the body of the man in a flash of red light. It wasn't that his amplified Rinnegan was able to slow down time, but rather he was able to see at such a fast pace that it felt like time had stopped, but rather it moved at a pace far slower than the crawl of a snail. The eyes also allowed him a limited ability to anticipate the next move of his opponent, but that wasn't what he was using at the moment. Naruto's lips twitched upwards when he saw his subordinate grunt as he got back to his feet. He took a few steps back and lifted both of his hands to Indra, motioning him to come at him again. Come on. If you wanted a practice dummy, then I would have gladly agreed to be that dummy, my king. Indra grunted sourly, his pride hurt that he had been taken out in the blink of an eye. I apologize, Indra, but that was the quick eye check, now for the body check. Naruto said and again beckoned his loyal till death subordinate to come. As you wish, my lord. He ran to Naruto and slashed the head cleaver to the side, tearing through the sky towards Naruto's left side. The king lifted his left forearm and blocked the blow, bright red and yellow sparks rained down after contact, not because Naruto had quickly changed the composition of his arm from normal to a metal Azura path arm, like he did with his battle against Meitorumi, but rather used his unbreakable obsidian under armor along his arm and fingers to defend against the attack. He stepped back from a palm strike and then jammed his foot into the midsection of the swordsman, driving air out of the man's lungs. Naruto slid around the stunned platinum rank and again kicked the back of his knee, though this time sweeping his feet from under him in a blur of motion and slamming the men into the ground with an axe kick to the neck. Naruto stepped back and dusted down his shirt. "It seems I've still got it," he said before he walked closer to Indra and helped him back to his feet. The division head bowed his head in humility and Naruto smiled. "You did well." "Thank you, sir." "Go and get yourself fixed up. There is still a festival for you to celebrate." Indra nodded and allowed Karen to gently throw his arm over her shoulder and lead him to the medical bay in the arena. The other division heads trooped to him and fell on one knee, with their right hands over their hearts. Mora, the head of Hunter Ninjas, asked their king, "What will you be doing next, my lord?" Naruto hummed as he looked at them. "I will be going to the ground to perform a few personal missions." He made sure to emphasize personal. "You do not want a guard detail?" Mora asked, fighting the urge to raise his voice at his king. The Rinnegan king waved their concerns away. "The missions I want to go to are of the greatest importance and I have to do them by myself. That means I do not want a guard detail or any tail following me, am I understood?" The division heads faltered nervously before they bowed their heads. "Yes, sir." "Good. I will be leaving in a few minutes, but make sure my absence isn't noticed. If anyone asks for me, then say that I am not around, simple as that." "Yes, sir." "I'm sure you are all aware of the protocol if by any chance I am not present to lead. We are to all go about our functions until your return, my king." Hamato, the head of intelligence and interrogation, said in a low grunt, not very happy that his king did not want anyone going with him to the ground. It was not that they doubted their king did not know how to best defend himself, the battle had served to show them he was still fully capable, but rather the itch in them constantly wanted to make sure that their king was okay and in good health. "You will all report back to me when I return." "When will you return, sir?" Yu Akuso, head of espionage and infiltration, asked. "In 6 days or so. Maybe sooner, maybe later, I'm not very sure. I will relay any change to my scheduled return to you, Hamato." The bald man nodded as Naruto's black with red ringed eyes flicked over to him. "Make sure my kingdom is still in one piece when I come back." "We swear it on our lives, my king," the division heads chorused, even Karen and Indra, who had returned after healing the latter. The red-haired medic and the black-haired swordsman dropped onto their right knees, like the other division heads, placed their hands over their hearts and made the oath with the others. "We will defend the Tsukai kingdom with our lives." As it was their sworn duty, they never really had to verbally profess this because it was a well-known fact. Naruto clapped his hands and waved for them to leave as he began his steady walk to the entrance gate to the mighty floating kingdom. "Then I will see you all later." He wasn't going to use the royal vehicle to take him down to the ground but rather fly down. He already had his things packed and sealed into a small segment on his wrist. There was no need to go back to his palace to get his things. His division heads escorted him to the entrance, clearing a path through the gaggle of excitedly murmuring citizens that saw their king in the flesh. A few of them even passed out. Naruto waved to them with a tiny smile and nodded back to the salute the gatekeepers sent him, each one of them standing in a rigid standing position by their post. The 16-year-old Rinnegan holder shook his head when his driver made to enter the royal car, silently telling him that he wouldn't be taking the car. He turned back to look at everyone, the division heads that stood at a row before him, the gatekeepers at attention by their post, and the massive gathering of citizens to see their king. A true smile came to Naruto and he waved to them for the last time before his feet slowly left the ground and he descended down to the ground, much to the uproarious cheers of his people. At the moment, the Tsukai kingdom was floating over the ocean much further away from Uzushio and Kumo but still within lightning country. The king dropped down to the earth, ensure the solid black armor under his short-sleeved red shirt and black pants was still in place before he ran headlong towards Konoha. Day 1, 6 days left. 9:30 p.m. Konoha Graveyard. Kanahagakuer no Sato. Fire Country. The Death Reaper Seal. One of two existing seals that was able to seal away the strongest tailed beast on the planet, the nine-tailed fox. No simple seal or vessel was capable of holding the nine tails for an extended period of time without it being destroyed and the backlash of the unsealing taking its toll on the surrounding environment. The first considered seal was the demonic beast 14 chain shackle seal, which conjured 14 great binders that would hold down all nine tails of the fox as well as the arms, legs and neck for added measure. It was greatly effective in sealing away the fox as well as ensuring that the beast had no influence on the holder. Quite frankly, it was the more trusted of the two existing seals that were able to hold the fox until the death of the holder, where it too would die. The downside was that it took exactly 14 days to draw and shackle the beast inside a holder, which must be Uzumaki because the clan's chakra was proven effective in containing the beast. Each shackle took a whole day and the next shackle had to be fastened immediately after or else the beast would gain freedom. Barely anyone had enough chakra for 3 days of continuous use, much less 14 days of use, beside the much acclaimed Uzumaki clan, but even with this great chakra buff the user of the seal, an Uzumaki, would die from strain after the 14 shackles had been set in place. Mito was the first person to use this to contain the fox within her after leading the fox away from the fight between Madara Uchiha and her husband, Hashirama Senju, who was also globally known to be the Shodaime Hokage as well as the strongest ninja that ever lived. Kushina Uzumaki was the second person to have this seal used to contain the fox in her. The sealer had to be awake and actively seal the beast for 14 straight days, but also the person the beast was being sealed into. The world watched the effect of having the beast slowly removed and transferred into its second holder, a slow decline into madness before the inevitable death of the sealer. Steady madness waited for the person that slowly removed the seal from within him or her, so what would happen if all 14 shackles were destroyed as one and the tailed beast was savagely torn out of the Jinchuriki? Terrible insanity. This was why Kushina, after fighting in the Third Shinobi War and going on numerous missions that would sooner break the mind of any other person, a strong kunoichi in her own right, lost her mind after her beast had been taken from her. The Death Reaper seal was not too innocent either. The seal could take a relatively short time to draw, but in order to seal the beast into its next holder the sealer needed to summon the Shinigami, the death god, to do it. Minato didn't have the chakra to use the 14 shackles and Kushina was much too insane to lend a hand, so he had no other option but to summon the death god to separate the Kyuubi's chakra and her soul and seal them into Naruto and Naruko respectively. Before the god could stab his hand through Minato's back to complete the deed, the Yondaime was pushed aside by the Sandaime. No one was aware, but the Shinigami desired to consume the Namikaze's soul very much. The blonde man had created 2 high S-rank abilities, one of which pushed through the realms of mortals into the one of heavenly deities. The Flying Thunder God Seal. A seal, or jutsu, that allowed Minato to travel from one point to another faster than lightning and as many times or as many places as he wanted. This was one of the main reasons Minato was such a feared man over the continent, his ability to seamlessly be in many places at once, adding his taijutsu as well as general jutsu abilities, and the Yondaime was the strongest and fastest living shinobi on the planet. Most even compared him to the likes of Madara and Hashirama. The death god was all too happy when he was summoned to seal the Kyuubi into the man's twin children, but he was enraged when the older Hokage shoved his dinner out of the way to take his place. The Shinigami could not change the direction of his hand, so he kept going, plunging through the soul of Hiruzen Sarutobi and sealing the Kyuubi into the twins. As punishment for being denied the soul he so much desired to devour and instead being given a tired old soul, the Shinigami swore to consume either of his children's soul when they died unless he was sated with the soul of any one of the people that he yearned to eat. Those that have cheated death numerous times. This was why Minato didn't care much that Naruko had been killed. Being eaten by the death god was more merciful than what he had in mind for his children when they returned. Besides, if Konoha had plenty of people that defied death frequently, then it was to his benefit. Dark Rinnegan eyes looked to the tombstone of the third Hokage. Konoha had a long list of people that frequently defied death, so much so that it annoyed the death god. But the Rinnegan king needed to know who was possibly at the top of that list somehow. He couldn't summon the Shinigami to ask, the price was too high, but he did know someone that possibly knew each and every death-defiant person in Konoha. But before that, Naruto turned his back to the grave of the third Hokage to a wide area of land sparsely populated with trees and bushes. His black with red ringed eyes shone in the dark as he lifted his left hand, palm open and facing upwards. As his hands rose, the ground trembled lightly, just about enough to alert the Konoha ninjas, but he had that sorted out. He had a shadow clone also make the ground shake far behind him to the east gate of the village. As his hand became level with his hip and rising, the ground cracked open, shaking up the trees and bushes around it. The crack increased as Naruto's hand lifted up to his diaphragm level. When he got to his chest, a wide, dark purple dome peeked out from the ground. After this the shaking stopped abruptly, but Naruto's hand kept rising, revealing a large, purple head of a creature. With black with red ringed eyes and a fat, light purple nose. The head had no ears, seeing as a kind of light brown-red cloak helmet covered its head, thick, light purple eyebrows that barely touched the massive nose of the beast. Naruto hummed the Rinnegan ability under his breath. Naruko Path, Summoning Jutsu, King of Hell. It was like the world around him watched in horror as Naruto mentally commanded for the King of Hell to open its mouth, revealing a frightening gaping maw. It had thick, sharp teeth under its upper lip, but the bottom was bare, though there was only darkness inside it. The Rinnegan King was not in the least bit intimidated by the sight. The redhead gingerly dropped his left hand but raised it again with his right up to his belly. A poof of smoke later revealed a clean white body bag about the size of a 10-year-old child. He gently dropped the bag onto the ground as he knelt down on both knees, clenched his eyes shut tightly and took in 3 deep gulps of air before he opened his eyes again and unzipped the body bag. He couldn't suppress the tears from falling down from his eyes when he saw the face of his twin sister, her face set in a peaceful smile, the one she had on after her throat had been slit to put him at ease, but that had failed because her brother futilely thrashed against his captors. The 16-year-old boy sniffed and his shaking hands went down, gently tucking a strand of red hair over her ear. Naruto was now sobbing quietly, his tears splashing down on the immaculate face of his sister, barely resisting the urge to hug her body. A few minutes of crying over her body, the king pulled down the zip of the body bag, revealing that his sister was in an armless red dress with gold trimmings at the bottom, but not in obsidian under armor but rather bandages to hide the pain-stacking stitches over her body. Orochimaru and Kabuto did indeed want to incinerate Naruko's body, but not before they conducted a series of tests on her corpse. Naruto recovered her body from Kabuto's section of the lab, slashed up, ripped apart and devoid of blood. It had taken Naruto months to feed her his blood, because their godfather had said that they were the same blood type, as well as many months of sorrowfully stitching her body together. Only his division heads knew that he had been doing that, but everyone in the kingdom knew that the king had a beloved sister that had been murdered by their dead slave master. Naruto sniffed and rubbed the tears cascading down his face with the back of his hands. The eyes of the King of Hell looked down on his master stoically, keeping its massive mouth open. The boy gently picked up his dead sister, easing her out of the body bag, and steadily walked to the gaping King of Hell. The king of the Tsukai kingdom knelt down as he got into the mouth of the King of Hell and dropped his sister on her back. He stood back up and admired her glowing, peaceful face for a few moments before he walked backwards out of the mouth of the King of Hell. The King of Hell closed its mouth and Naruto patiently waited before his patience was awarded when darkness gathered over the head of the King of Hell. It was formless but with a pair of evil red eyes. The king did not waver in place as he crossed his arms, meeting the glare of the king of the dead, the Shinigami. 5 years ago Naruto had attempted to use the outer path, Samsara of heavenly life technique, an ability of the outer path of the Rinnegan, to revive his sister, but the Shinigami had barred his path and repeated his condition to the king before he could release hold of Naruko's soul. At that time Naruto did not know many people that the Shinigami would want to eat besides his father. Summoning the King of Hell was an ability stemming from the Naruko path of Naruto's Rinnegan. It allowed all that it swallowed to be healed and rejuvenated in both mind and body. It was a medic's wet dream. The Rinnegan ability could heal but it could not resurrect. Naruto would have to tap into the outer path to do that. Unlike when he was younger, he intended to use the outer path before healing his sister. This had inadvertently summoned the death god to inform him of the price for Naruko's soul. This time Naruto wanted to do it right. He wanted his sister to return back to the living with no pain and no trouble. He would heal her body of every and all abnormalities and diseases before placing her soul back inside. The reason the Shinigami was now present was because it had sensed the mortal body of the one he had devoured, or imprisoned within himself. You can only have her soul back when I have the soul of one who frequently defies death. The god of death reminded Naruto, who remained unafraid. The 16-year-old boy narrowed his eyes up to the god and replied, I will have this soul ready for you soon. The Shinigami hovered in the air silently, observing the Rinnegan king. He then said, in a deep voice that would normally drive any other mortal to insanity, I cannot reap your soul because of your Rinnegan. You are very lucky, Naruto. Naruto knew his eyes were special, even by normal standards, but to have the ability to repel the death god's touch. You will give me my sister and I will find one of those that frequently defy death. You are one of them, just so you know. And I am the only one you will never get. The god grumbled sourly, like a pouting child. Bring me the soul and your sister is yours, but if you don't then you will never see your sister again. Fine. The death god disappeared and the king of hell began healing the wounds of the girl inside its mouth, removing the stitches on her body and sealing up the skin, making it as good as new. Though the process of doing this for her whole body might take up to an hour since Naruto had commanded him to take his time to properly fix his sister, more than enough time for the king. Naruto turned back to the grave of the Sandaime and his lips twitched up in glee. Soon I will have Naruko and your sacrifice will all be in vain. His black with red ringed Rinnegan flashed in the night and there were dozens of chakra smoke burst around the head of the king of hell. The smoke cleared to reveal roughly 15 hulking monkeys stationed around the head housing his sister's corpse. All of which had his brand of Rinnegan eyes, he could see through each of them too. The animal path summoned animals all crouched onto the ground and hid their presence as their summoner ran out of the graveyard and into the hidden village. It was ironic how the summoning animals of the dead Sandaime were in some way contributing to destroying the village they once loyally served. The irony almost made Naruto chuckle out loud. Oh. 3 minutes later. The hospital. Kanahagakure no Sato. Fire Country. Tsunade Senju yawned loudly and smacked her lips as she pushed her key into the door of her office and twisted, locking it. Being the head doctor/medic of the hospital was hard work. She was in charge of screening in medics, nurses and doctors, make her rounds to ensure everyone was working, check the hospital records for any discrepancies, take charge of patients that were afflicted with severe problems and sift through papers and papers of reports from her subordinates. Today was particularly taxing on the Senju because Konohamaru, the late Sandaime's son, and Hanabi, the Hyuga clan head's youngest child, had gotten into a vicious fight over some ridiculous playing card. There were many casualties in the children's wing because of this fight but thankfully no one had died. Sasuke had gotten a severe concussion from Minato Jr. after the latter bashed his head into the wall many times because the former had attempted another Chidori on his turn back. Asuma and Guy had torn their calves during a spar. A few genin thought it was good idea to prank a teammate by pouring powdered ghost peppers into her pants. Lastly, Kushina had stubbed her toe on a door as she entered Inoichi's office for a mental evaluation. Needless to say, Tsunade was beginning to regret agreeing to become the head medic. Damn her guilty conscience. With Kushina losing even more of her mind, the mournful Senju found less of a reason to stay alive but more of a reason to atone for her ineffectiveness to save her family. The main reason she stayed in Konoha was to look after her niece, Kushina. The medic sharply looked up when the lips flickered. Strange. Her lips quirked down but she shrugged it off. Tsunade slipped the key into her pocket and began her trek out of the hospital, already making bar-hopping plans. The building was fairly silent, with just a few patients roaming around and in the company of her staff. Technically she wasn't supposed to leave until they were all asleep, but the woman felt very tired and in the need of a break from all the noise. She stopped outside of the hospital and sighed deeply. Katsu. The woman didn't even lift her hands to cut the genjutsu. The world around her wavered and thinned before she realized that she was on the empty roof of the hospital, looking ahead of her at a shadowy figure that stood with his back to her and looking at the Hokage's monument. Using AC-rank genjutsu on a jounin as experienced as I am. Quite frankly, I'm insulted. The person, she realized, had his arms crossed. He shifted slightly and spared a look over his shoulder before his eyes went back to the monument. She tried not to step back when she saw his eyes were black with red rings, a painful reminder of a child she once knew with purple and black rings. And yet you still went along with it. His voice was breezy, she noticed, but not quite enough for her not to hear him. It was a calm night, the stars were blinking in the sky with the waning crescent moon. I wanted to see who had the balls to put an illusion over me. I see. He hummed offhandedly. I'm gonna make this simple and straightforward. Who are you? I am. The person said and waved his right hand flippantly. An old memory. What's that supposed to mean? She said and crossed her powerful arms, ever ready to turn the figure's head into a smear on the ground at a moment's notice. Yes. The person didn't answer her question, but rather threw a question that very nearly unsettled her. Is it true you enjoy lying, Tsunade? I don't know what you're talking about. Now answer my quest dash. A good poker face is the key to winning a game of cards, or so I hear, and burying the truth under several mountains of lies is a good way to hide the pain of loss and dread decaying your soul, is that not so? Listen up, whoever you are, if you don't start making any sense right now I'm going to paint this roof red with your blood. The person shook his head. I came to ask a few innocent questions, after that I will leave you be. For now. I still don't know who you are. And you will not find out for now. He turned around and her whole body locked in place as his godly eyes leveled on her own. First we need to go somewhere. What dash? She ground as all bodily movements left her, forcing her to stand rigidly in place. Her eyes looked down to her immobile arms and legs before they flicked up to the shadowy figure, who was now facing her but there was still not enough light to illuminate his body. Take her and follow me. There was a large blast of chakra smoke behind her and she was summarily picked up by the back of her shirt by a sharp beak. A drill-beaked bird that had the eyes of its summoner flapped its mighty wings 3 times before it flew into the air after its master, who was rocketing through the sky, throwing an illusion around that he was a shooting star. No one saw him kidnap Tsunade or saw the chakra smoke because Naruto was using a much higher-ranked genjutsu to both hide his presence as well as the drill-beaked bird. Ooh. I will explain this as best and as nicely as I can. The figure began as he mentally ordered the bird to gently drop the Sannin onto her feet. The bird pulled its wings back to its body and shuffled back to hide in the shade of a tree. The woman saw that the figure had a little bit more form to show he was in a short-sleeved shirt and black pants, though she wondered whether or not he was barefoot or in a pair of really thin sandals. The other thing she observed was the massive rise from the ground behind the speaker on his right. He held up a finger when Tsunade was about to begin yelling obscenities, her mouth clamped shut as if an invisible hand was placed over her lower face. I would appreciate it if you kept quiet. That was when the rise in the ground shivered and a pair of black with red ringed eyes opened up close to the top, a large light purple nose flared under it and thick light purple eyebrows sprouted out from above the powerful eyes. If she had been placed on the other side of this thing, then she might be able to see its face, as well as her captors, in the light cast by those still awake in the village, but all she could see in the dim light was the awe-inspiring eyes, the nose and eyebrows, and then the mouth opened and the Senju's eyes widened in horror as its mouth gaped impossibly wide, showing a darkness inside it that was so deep and so palpable it made her gulp. Not that she would ever find out, but on the other side of the King of Hell was another face, which was where Naruko's body was being healed. For now though Naruto commanded for another face to be created on the back of its head. If I ask you a question and you do not answer it with 100% honesty, then that would rip out your tongue and drag your soul to hell. This was to his advantage because he would instantly get the memories of the Sannin, which would add up to Orochimaru's memories, making 2 Sannin memories. The woman was now visibly shaking, more from how hollow the boy's voice and also how terrifying it would be to be plunged into eternal darkness by this terrible beast. If you answer my questions with a question, your soul will go to hell. She swallowed thickly and closed her eyes tightly. If you answer my question cryptically, or vaguely, then, your soul will go to hell. Breathing suddenly became hard for the war veteran. She was trained by the Sandaime Hokage and had fought the likes of Hanzo the Salamander, but never in her life had she ever met a person as intimidating as this mysterious figure who had control of that nightmare-inducing monster. If you make light of a question I asked, then your soul goes to hell. If you do not answer a question, your soul goes to hell. His own red-ringed eyes at her from the King of Hell. Do you understand? Tsunade summoned as much pride she had in her body and tilted her chin up. Naruto's eyes narrowed but eased up when she whispered. Yes. The teen was mildly surprised he didn't need to prove himself, but he regained composure and asked. Who are the strongest shinobi currently in this village, Konoha? Name 5. Minato Namikaze, Shikaku Nara, Chusa Akimichi, Might Guy, and Asuma Sarutobi. Who are the strongest retired shinobi in the village? Name 5. The 3 council advisors to the Hokage, Koharu, Hamura, and Danzo, Mabuki Haruno and Fugomen. She's a farmer. Retired ninjas were those that were lucky enough to see old age. Who among those 5 are the most scarred? Name 3. Scars meant that they had been in many dangerous scuffles, especially for a retired ninja. It didn't have to be physical scars, it could also be psychological wounds. Mabuki Haruno, Danzo Shimura, and Fugomen. Who among those 3 have refused to come for a regular checkup? Name 2. This showed stubbornness, meaning that they were unwilling to ask for medical help because they mostly preferred self-medicating, and, which is not safe. Don't do it. Danzo Shimura and Fugomen. Who is the oldest between them? Danzo. How old is he? 73 years old. What rank would you give him based on his strength? Jounin rank. Have you given him an unasked for scan and why? Yes, and because I wanted to know why a man as old as him would be in such good shape. Last question, in your opinion, how desperate is Danzo to stay alive? The woman shook. I can sense different chakra in him, mostly around his arm and his eye, but he has seals there that try to suppress them. I don't know what they are specifically, but with how secretive Danzo is, it isn't good. Good. Now he had a target for one that frequently refused to die. You see. It wasn't so hard now, was it? Tsunade's vision became hazy and she fell flat onto her face. Gung. Tsunade sputtered awake, her eyes wide in horror and staring at the blackness before her. Her quivering hands patted down her body, surprised to find that there was a blanket covering her body. She reached with her left hand to her side and clicked on her bedside lamp, sighing in relief when the light went on to illuminate her bedroom in her apartment. The door flew open and Shizen stood at the door holding a kunai so tightly her knuckles were white. I thought I heard a noise. The assistant said and stashed her kunai back into the pouch on her lower back. Is something wrong, Lady Tsunade? The woman stared at Shizen for a few minutes, just grateful to be alive, before she shook her head with a gentle smile. No, it's fine. It was just a bad dream. Go back to bed. Meanwhile, back in the graveyard, Naruto smirked a little in triumph. His eyes went to the massive head behind him, as well as the hidden animal path summons. Now I need to find out where Danzo lives so I can take him. He silently mused to himself for a minute before he snapped his fingers. He had 2 spies in Konoha. One of them was especially close to the old geezer. He tapped the back of his hand, making a red dot light up in the very center of the back of his hand. He dragged the red dot towards his pinky, and then tapped his right ear, where a white earbud sat. Naruto closed his eyes and ran through his memory for the name of the spy he wanted. It finally clicked and he finally spoke to the awaiting receiver. Patch me over to Sai. Chapter 8. 6:30 p.m. 3 hours before Naruto arrived in Konoha. The Haruno household. The Wealth District, also called the Influential District. Kanahagakure no Sato. Fire Country. Ah, you must be my little Sakura's teammates. A fairly tall, light woman with softly flowing waist-length pink hair and smooth skin said in an unconsciously seductive voice to the children. She was more than used to using that voice in getting what she wanted. Her child eyed her suspiciously and the mother scratched the back of her head as she came to the realization. Mabuki cleared her throat with a delicate hand placed over her chest, making her white casual short-sleeved shirt and red home dress swish with her movement. It barely reached the ground, just a bit under her knees. Please come in, she said in a much lighter voice. Despite Sai and Minato Jr. being little more than robots, the 13-year-old boys gulped thickly, prompting the woman to sweat drop and chuckle nervously. Sakura groaned sourly and dragged both of them in by their ears so that they would stop ogling her mother. Though both of them took off their shoes at their female teammates' insistence, placing them beside the door in a row. Sakura knew her mother couldn't help it, making knees weak and groins heavy, but that didn't mean she liked it being done on two people she considered her friends. "Can you and your friends help me set up the dinner table?" she called from the door. The woman closed the door shut with a click. "Yes, Mama," the girl shouted back as she led the charge to the living room once the boys managed to gather their tongues from the ground. Mabuki Haruno was a very beautiful woman, that was an undisputed fact in all of Konoha, with a heart-shaped face, lovely teal-green eyes, a cute button nose and perfect lips that were ever painted a deep, intoxicating red. Her every walk could get a man standing in no time. She had used her looks to take her far in the shinobi ranks, but not as one that would kneel down and blow pipes just for a raise, but rather she became a mistress of illusions. The shimmering pink flower was what they called her. Mabuki was a great jounin, even though ninjutsu wasn't much for her and taijutsu was learned more out of self-defense than anything. Despite her looks, the woman was reputed to never be able to keep down a life partner, with each one either being too timid to object to her or too brash to take her opinions lying down. She never really focused on relationships when she was an active kunoichi, but rather saw most of the men around her as ways to satisfy her ever so ravenous hunger for sex. Minato Namikaze was different though. He was a man that embodied all the positives in the universe, in her eyes, and she saw that he could never do any harm. The pink-haired woman had gotten into many fights with Kushina over who was the better woman for him until the redhead later won. His marriage though never stopped the Haruno's shameless advances. Her image of Minato was destroyed when he had summoned her and a few others to her office and informed them that they were all going to be in a fake retrieval mission. Kidnappers had taken his children, Naruto and Naruko, and they were to try their best but ultimately fail. While in truth it was their godfather that had taken them to be trained to be Konoha best tools. His reason for this? The men didn't even bother to hide the venom welling up in his very being. He hated with children with a burning passion. Against popular opinion, Mabuki loved children. She had always wanted a child of her own, but Tsunade had carefully ruled out that prospect when it had been discovered that her womb had been damaged. No explanation came up, but Mabuki had a faint idea what had killed her chances of bearing children, despite always begging her sex partners to dump it in. She didn't want to relive those memories. Because of the hate of the yondaime, she retired from being a kunoichi, against the latter's wishes, and became a civilian council woman in charge of traveling merchants that were born in Konoha. The pink-haired woman found Sakura in the orphanage. A tiny little girl of 5 years old with a mop of dirty pink hair and bright green eyes that sparkled with intelligence. The girl looked so much like her that she felt that the heavens had heard her cries for a child and dropped down an angel. Sakura was everything Mabuki ever wanted in a child: smart, but not a prodigy, adorable and stubborn as a rock, but only when it came down to living or dying, and Sakura had that in spades. Sakura was a smart girl, she was not a prodigy, so the proud mother wasn't surprised that her adopted daughter became Kunoichi of the Year, much like her. Though the mother wasn't too happy to hear that her daughter was having trouble making or keeping friends in the academy, she still found the willpower to hope. The woman was in her early 40s, but she was still good friends with her former teammates, so she banked on her Sakura making friends with her teammates. The woman happily swished into the room holding a gleaming pot of ramen in one hand and another pot full of roasted pork meat. She didn't particularly like the food choice her daughter's teammates had asked for, but she was just too happy to hear her child was making friends. The retired kunoichi dropped the pot in the middle of the table and spun around the table, serving the children food as she passed them and leaving the air with the scent of her rose petal shampoo. It was like her every movement was similar, if not the same, as a professional ballerina dancing. Smooth, fluid, and in control. Before they knew it, she spun on her toes and sat down gently onto the seat at the head of the table. Sakura glared at her and coughed heavily. Ahem. Mabuki, who was about to swallow a forkful of ramen, paused and looked at her daughter, who was subtly nodding over her shoulder to the front door. The woman slowly lowered her fork of food. She was going to spend an extra hour in her private gym just to burn it out of her body, and grinned evilly. Sakura's green eyes remained defiant and insistent. Ahem. I'll have you know, Sakura, that I quite enjoy eating food too. The poor girl was now in a coughing fit. Akahem gakahem. The woman pouted. Fine, if you need me. She sniffled and sharply looked away. I'll be organizing my underwear. Anyone want to join me? Mama. Mabuki cackled at how red-faced her daughter became. I was joking. She was about to leave, but stopped when the son of the Yondaime spoke. Lady Haruno. Yes, Minato Jr. Junior is fine. Then please call me Mabuki. Lady Haruno was my mother's name. Sakura groaned and slumped into her chair in embarrassment. Ugh, Mama. The blonde mini-clone of the fourth Hokage nodded. I wish to ask you some questions. But Junior. This is supposed to be a team dinner. No outsiders. Don't mind her, she's just salty she hasn't hit her growth spurt yet. This time the girl didn't groan but rather sat up and lifted her chin stubbornly. She would hit that spurt when she was good and ready, damn it. Sai pursed his lips and looked to his teammate, then he said. Is that so? His empty eyes suddenly became much too amused and his grin was stretched painfully wide. As a matter of fact I knew something was wrong but I didn't think her lack of chest would be the cause, he chuckled when the girl faced him with fire in her eyes. Meanwhile her mother giggled into her hands. Junior cleared his throat. Just a few questions. She sat down. Ask away. The boy wasted no time. What happened on the retrieval mission you went on 10 years ago with the Yondaime, Ibiki Marino, and Inoichi Yamanaka? Can I have the details? The mission had happened 13 years ago and it was still as S-rank as it ever was, but Junior removed the file from inside his jacket and placed on the table, beside his food. Is it true that you, and I quote, accidentally cast an illusion over Minato that threw off his aim? Her lips tightened and her eyes fought not to harden at how similar the boy looked to his father. He didn't behave like Minato Sr. but he was as critically as his father. Well. The silence that came after was deafening. The retired Jounin's eyes became large like dinner plates and she unconsciously reared back a little. I'm sorry, I have an errand to run. She stood up and left the room in a flurry of clothes. Junior narrowed his eyes. Was that guilt? Sai and Sakura shared a look as the boy kept his eyes on where the Haruno mother had sat. Oh. 2 hours 20 minutes later. The Forest of Death. There was very little that could be hidden from the Rinnegan. The Rinnegan king stopped before the gates in front of the forest. He bent his right knee and leaped over the gate in one quick movement. As he landed inside he immediately faced his black with red ringed eyes on a tiger twice as large as any normal man. On seeing the eyes of the person that entered the forest it scampered away, whining like a cat that lost its food. The king scoffed and began walking forward, a single red-haired teen with the most evil eyes the animals had ever seen. It was like his whole body glowed with an ethereal black light, attracting eyes but being too scary to actually be approached. The trees soon became too dense for the faint moonlight to penetrate and light up his path, but Naruto's eyes glowed in the dark, something that made every leaf in a 20-foot radius around his quiver and every tree bow towards him. The world became brighter in his eyes and the light green specks of light that littered inside the trees, their nature chakra, gave him the light he needed to tread forward. He stopped before a tree with absolutely no green light flowing in it and he placed his right palm on the trunk before him. There was a long, low hiss as his hand pushed forward. His eyes shone with delight as the whole tree fell apart to reveal a 10-foot-long metal cylinder that looked to be about 4 feet wide, just about as wide as the tree was before it was taken down and used as a cover. The leaves and chunks of bark on the ground shuffled aside by his gravity control and he kept pushing forward. The hiss continued until a seal flared to life under his palm. There was a spurt of fire under his hand but he suppressed his delighted laugh. The fire collected over the seal in a translucent, fairly flat bubble of light blue energy under Naruto's palm. The flat bubble steadily increased as the defensive seal kept pumping out more and more fire to scorch the intruder. There was no doubt the base was on fire with alarms but he didn't really care, until the flat bubble became as large as his palm before he compressed it all into a single spinning ball of death that bore a close resemblance to a jutsu his father created. The king pushed the ball forward and the seal immediately gave out in a glorious shower of yellow and red sparks. A terrible grinding, cracking sound broke through the deathly silence of the forest as the king pushed the contained ball of concentrated fire onto the door of the hideout. A large panel opened up when the locks gave out under the tremendous heat, just about as tall as him, and he kept pushing forward with the fire in his hand until the door exploded outwards, throwing the door down a long flight of stairs into the blackness of nothing. Naruto pulled back his hand and held the orb of gathered fire, held together by the chakra-draining/containing ability of the Preta-path of his Rinnegan. His black with red eyes looked down into the stairs before he tossed the ball of molten, super-compressed fire into it. The ball lifted up into the air and light up the darkness, like a torch. Naruto looked over his shoulder and multiple bursts of smoke later stood 5 grotesque-looking centipedes that wound as long as 20 feet with dripping poisonous teeth and Rinnegan eyes. The multiple-legged creatures gathered before the door and wound their bodies around the entrance as Naruto got inside, blocking the exit with their armor-like bodies, though 2 stood before the door to guard it against anyone that found a way to break past. Naruto didn't want any survivors. The Preta-path suppressed bubble of fire lit up his path down the stairs. He wavered in place at the top of the stairs, deciding whether or not to simply fly down to meet the hundreds of ninjas awaiting him, with the prideful men, Shimura Danzo, refusing to retreat standing behind them. He ultimately decided not to, not because his eyes couldn't handle using more than 2 paths of the Rinnegan at a time. He could use all the paths if he wanted, but rather he wanted to enjoy this opportunity to erase one of the people he most hated in the world. Shimura Danzo, he could remember very vividly, always visited him and his sister during their time in Sound to supervise their conditioning by Orochimaru. The old man never failed to remind them that it was one of his dreams to one day have them as his tools as well as to become Hokage. If he had to kill Minato to do that, then so be it. Naruto began his steady, careful walk down the long flight of stairs. He and his sister, Naruko, hated the men with a passion because he stood by and supervised their torture and training. They also hated him because Danzo actively discussed his plans to become Hokage, killing Minato if necessary. That was what made both twins hate him even more. They wanted to kill their father. His sensory abilities allowed him to sense the increasing number of people waiting for his arrival. He focused even more and discovered that the network of tunnels was gradually becoming emptier since the people were waiting for him, except those that waited in a large, separate room, possibly as support. Root was an illegal organization that was founded by the old Warhawk himself, and Sai was a member of this organization. The king could remember what he told the 2 5-year-olds 7 years ago, a whole 4 months after leaving Sound with the other former slaves. He had just assigned spies to the other main villages and a few other countries. He chose to use children because he planned for them to work their way up the rankings of the village and gain trust from the grassroots, garnering a good reputation and great trust among people. A smaller reason he used children most was because he had a distrust for adults, and this was understandable, though as months went by with his people he excluded the adults of his kingdom and those that served him on the ground. There were only a few adults among his spies, but they were mostly to work among the civilians. Despite being busy with their functions in other countries, Naruto ensured to call them all back, a handful at a time, to collect their rank under armor depending on their level of skill. The civilians were given bronze forearm, shin and shoulder pads that could blur out of sight, and the ninjas were mostly given silver ranks. Sai and his other spy were both silver ranked, and they always wore their under armor under their regular clothing disguised to look like their skin. Their rank was their pride. Yes, he remembered exactly what he told the 2 loyal children. I want you to be my eyes and ears in Konohagakure. I want you to gain trust among the populace, as much as humanly possible. You will support each other, be friends with each other, but if this gets in the way with your cover, then keep your association a close-kept secret. Your allegiance to me should also be a secret. Are you both now aware of what it means to be my spies? Yes, sir, they replied. If life in their cages as slaves had done anything for them, it was force them to grow up. Among the many that had swarmed around their new leader, hoping to be picked to serve as his spies, Naruto chose them because of their zeal. We will not disappoint you. I trust you will not. If there is any problems, do not hesitate to contact me or the division heads. We will extract you if it gets too perilous. We are very grateful, sir. He escorted them into the village and dropped them in the orphanage. The other spy was the first to be adopted. Technically, Sai was among those that Danzo had gathered back to his root base to serve as his operatives. Sai had disappeared from the radar for a few years, but his other spy kept him informed of what had happened. When Sai resurfaced, Naruto was made aware that the boy, then 11 years old, had risen through the root ranks and was now among the 3 right-hand men for Danzo. Why had Danzo's brainwashing not worked on Sai? The answer was very simple. Both spies were fanatically loyal to Naruto. Much like everyone in his kingdom, this had kept their minds on track. The root operative was currently on a secret mission to Hidden Mist to investigate a claim a traveling salesman made that the village was now ultimately in the command of a great kingdom full of powerful warriors and a king that was as revered as a god. It was minutes after his dinner that he had been sent on the mission by Danzo. The king could hear the deep regret in the voice of the younger teen that he was not around to meet him, but Naruto reassured the boy that it was fine. All he needed was where he could find Danzo. The boy went above and beyond by telling Naruto where all 5 entries and exits of the hidden base was, the approximate size and the exact number of ninjas currently in the base. A few root had gone on a separate mission to Demon Country to steal an ancient artifact, but besides them, and Sai's team on their way to Kiri, the others were still inside the base. The information was more than enough for the Rinnegan King. Naruto stopped 10 steps above the ground floor and mentally shifted his floating orb of fire far behind him. The orb enlarged to form a large bubble that covered the exit, which also sent light down to shine in the dimly lit area and blocked their exit. Filled with dozens of root ninjas, he looked over the still forms of all the white masked ninjas and saw an open door, where even more ninjas waited in an even bigger room. The red head smirked darkly. The black with red ringed Rinnegan pulsed and all the bodies of the ninjas in the area locked up, standing stock still and in attention. He lifted his right hand up, palm open and facing the ground, and their feet followed suit by lifting off the ground. They didn't even have the bodily control to struggle against his powerful hold. When his hand was shoulder level and suddenly closed his hand into a light fist, and all of the levitating ninjas shot together into the middle of the room, crashing against each other in a floating ball of limbs. Then Naruto clenched his fist tighter and the push of gravity became too much for any human body. Blood exploded from their bodies and painted the walls and ground red, though never meeting the master of the Rinnegan. The bodies kept being crushed together, loud cracks echoed through the dim area and shot through the air of the room behind them as bones broke. Naruto's smile twitched up, but only a little, as he increased the power of the air around them. This finally led the ball of bleeding flesh to turn into thick red paste, full of human bones and fairly intact organs. Naruto flicked his hand over his shoulder and sent the ball of blood into the orb of fire behind him, commanding the thick black smoke to blow it up the flight of stairs so that the smell wouldn't irritate him. The pt.2-controlled ball of fire fizzled and sputtered as the blood finally finished entering it, exiting as nothing more than thick pungent air. He suspected that the animals of the forest would catch the scent and run to the cause. It was what he wanted. The ball of fire kept bubbled but never pouring out of the containment sphere, which wasn't controlled by the Deva path, which controlled attractive and repulsive gravitational forces, but rather the Preta path, which allowed Naruto to suck out as much chakra as he wanted from anywhere or anyone, and also a myriad of other abilities. Naruto began his walk to the other root ninjas. This'll be fun. Needless to say that regardless of the ruthless training regimen of the ninjas, they were very much unprepared to face the might of the Rinnegan King. The chase much more amusing than he thought. After he walked into the room with the next wave of root operatives, with his arms crossed and his Rinnegan eyes shining with hidden humor, the ninjas crashed down on him in waves of black, all in a flurry of metal and limbs to kill the intruder that had infiltrated their base. When they were close to him, about 3 feet away, the world spun to a slow crawl until it moved much slower than a pregnant snail. He could see each and every blank masked man and woman that rained down on him with the intent to end his life. He counted exactly 65 root operatives. The teen uncrossed his arms but kept his and his shoulders hunched over as his arms disconnected from his shoulders for the briefest of moments. His head lowered and looked to the ground, throwing his shaggy red hair over his eyes and hiding them in deep blackness. Quick as a flash he lifted his eyes and his Rinnegan flashed mightily, so much so that despite the pause in all motion there was a fast thud around his feet, heavily suppressed so that all of Konoha wouldn't feel it but not the whole base. He lifted both of his arms, fists tightly clenched and facing his sides. Then from his fists bright blue, scorching hot lasers fired around him. He moved them as he blasted the lasers about, cutting through each shinobi with ease until he abruptly stopped and brought his arms back to his body, crossing his forearms over his chest and shutting his eyes in concentration. Naruto threw his arms open as he opened his eyes. The world began moving at its normal pace once again as the teen muttered, "Almighty push." The whole riddle shinobi around them gasped out blood from out of their mouths in the shock they could not hold down. The air around Naruto vibrated violently and surged outwards in a bubble of extra thick air, throwing the root ninjas back and into the walls with enough force to bash their brains and their skulls into mush. A few though blasted out of the room and into the next room, as spacious as the Chunin exam stadium. They collided against their surprised comrades and summarily died from the number of thin holes in their bodies. The Rinnegan King continued his easy stroll forwards, each step sending terrible tremors through the base, though the seals holding the place up and keeping it from being felt in Upper Konoha. The thudding became louder and heavier as he approached the arena until it stopped abruptly with him standing at the door with his hands to his side. He regarded the gathered, tense ninjas that numbered close to 7 dozen and as far as 25 feet away from him. All of them stood in fighting stances, tightly gripping their weapons or their fists. It was silent for a few minutes, until "Kill him," a voice he suspected was Danzo's reverberated around the whole fighting area. Naruto smirked and ran to them, his head low and his arms flying behind him in a classic ninja run, as they also ran to him as well. As he neared them he leaped high into the air and landed in the middle of the fray. His fist shot out and caved in the face of a shinobi. He slapped a sword aside, causing the blade to slice open the throat of another ninja and sent a spinning kick to the swordsman that flung the receiver far across the room. The king caught a blow with his right palm and dragged the root closer, tripping him with a smooth sweeping of his legs so he lay sprawled on his face and using his limp body as a shield against a deadly fire jutsu. Naruto threw the dead ninja in his grips away and drove his fist again into the torso of another, making blood blast out of his mouth. The Rinnegan holder broke the left knee of another ninja with a wicked kick and dragged the ninja again to be his shield against a barrage of shuriken. His drove his elbow up the chin of a ninja, grabbed the face of another one that thought his back was open and brought it down to meet the ground in a earth-trembling slam. His palms raced forward and palms struck the chest of 4 root operatives, leaving deep dents above their hearts, and he allowed them to fall as he faced other black ops. As he smoothly flowed under 7 sword stroke that threatened to cleave off his head, his Rinnegan eyes flashed multiple times as they looked around with many quick flicks. This time he wasn't slowing down time in his eyes but rather masterfully making use of his ability to see chakra and his limited ability to predict, or anticipate, an opponent, not unlike the Sharingan. His eyes flipped around without him turning his head to look behind him as well. The incredibly powered Rinnegan in his eyes pulsed 7 times in the span of half a second, flashing over all the remaining ninjas, still about 60 in number. The king clenched his fist and stepped on the foot of a ninja with enough strength to flatten it, throwing the screaming ninja above his head to slam into the ceiling like an arrow. The man's body hung limply like a grotesque chandelier. He grabbed hold of the flak jacket of a ninja that came at him with a kunai wrapped with 3 seal bombs, a mass suicide attempt because the tremendous blast would take out dozens around him in the process. He ripped the blade out of his hand, pulled out 2, shoved them into the ninja's mouth, breaking the mask in the process, cracking his elbow up to shut his mouth up and sending a heart-stopping punch to his heart to fling him away as he threw the kunai in another direction behind him. BBO. Light flooded the room, and despite the arena being very well lit, it still blinded those that were unprepared for it and blew apart those in its blast radius from both bombs. He slid away a small step and his foot cracked against the head of a root ninja that attempted to ambush him from beneath him, breaking his neck cleanly, and with another kick he decapitated him and the flying head bashed into the head of another shinobi. He shifted his shoulder aside and dipped his fingers into the shuriken pouch of his last attacker with blurring speed far surpassing the men, grabbing a fistful of standard shuriken and jamming his fingers into neck of the person he took the shuriken from, severing his neck bone cleanly. He brandished the shuriken in his fingers and peppered them in a small crowd of ninjas. Naruto puffed out a breath and stood up straight again. His Rinnegan looked around and he smirked at the dead bodies surrounding him, bleeding corpses that were twisted in painful positions. More than a few of them were headless or were scorched from the bomb. The king dusted down his red shirt with his metal-armored fingers and continued his steady walk towards a stunned Danzo, who after witnessing one teenager take out a room of about 86 professional, highly trained root ninjas began to seriously question his own chances. The men stumbled away from the eerily calm bearer of the Rinnegan, never really taking a good look, much to Naruto's disappointment. The elder hobbled with his cane into the other room and Naruto followed after at his own leisurely pace. He still had about 10 minutes before the King of Hell would fully heal his sister, and even still the monkey and drill-beaked bird summons were keeping careful guard of them. He could even see through their eyes, which would have been a great disadvantage given that he was very busy at the moment, but he could switch to as many fields of vision he wanted without disrupting his own normal vision. He wanted to bring back his sister so much it was painful, but he also wanted one of the top 5 most hated people in his list to suffer terror before he died. The master of the Rinnegan deftly picked up a tanto that jutted out of the ground with his right hand and twirled it in his fingers, before he flicked it to his right, flinging off the caked-up blood spattered on it. His obsidian boots, connected to the equally black armor under his clothes, splashed through the small puddles of blood and then the black scuff marks caused by one of the bombs. He slashed across 2 ninjas and stepped over their leaking bodies. His new weapon shot forward and sliced through the heart of a ninja. He unsheathed his blade and pushed the dead ninja aside. His left hand came forward and grabbed a ninja by his neck as he fell down from the ceiling. His blade blurred forward into the root ninja's stomach an uncountable number of times as Naruto stared deeply into the dying man's eyes through the eyeholes of the other's mask. He discarded the profusely bleeding man over his shoulder and threw the tanto in front of him, slicing through the hearts of 4 ninjas before pinning a 5th ninja into the wall. He walked around the lifeless shinobi to Danzo. The one-eyed elder had finally found his bravery and stood in the very last training ground, his eyes looking down on the far superior eyes of the king. The elder was standing a few short feet away from the wall. Naruto stopped 10 feet away from him and cocked his head to the side. "Do you know who I am?" The man narrowed his eye, then they became slightly wide. "I thought you were dead." "I still have a lot to live for." The council elder glared. "Then you made the mistake of coming here, brat." Naruto opened his arms, motioning at the carnage that he had left in his wake. "I assumed that this would be more than enough to quell your pride, but I should not be surprised. You were always an old fool." His black with red ringed eyes glowed after his last words. Danzo snarled and clenched his walking stick, pointing it at Naruto, and a short blade slid out of the base. "You still do not know what respect means, even after all the conditioning. I knew I should have pressed harder to take you and your sister from that vile snake." He spat, getting angrier at the small smile on Naruto's face. Naruto shook his head in exasperation. "We both hated you, you know, me and my sister. We wanted to hang your guts all over Konoha and dance on your heart. You both were and still are weak." Then a realization hit the old war hawk and he smirked evilly at Naruto. "Oh yes, that filthy sister of yours was killed, was she not?" Suddenly all the amusement left Naruto's godly eyes and the teen slowly cocked his head to the side, staring at the older men with hollow eyes. "I watched the video of that snake slicing her throat. Your screams were simply amusing." He licked his lips and Naruto remained still, though his Rinnegan glowed even brighter and the lights around dimmed a little, though the men did not notice since he was too invested in his story. The funniest part of that was when she said you shouldn't worry about her. The men chuckled in a deep voice, the sound resonating around the room full of corpses. The king's red-ringed eyes glazed over and his lips twitched downwards. "She was more worried about what would happen to you than herself. Only a naive child would do that dash." He coughed as an invisible hand wrapped around his throat. He hacked and clawed at his neck, dropping his cane as he did so, but struggled even more when he felt no physical hands choking him. Naruto walked to the gasping man, forcing Danzo down onto his knee and his hands forced to support his body from crashing into the ground. "You just called my sister naive." His right foot shot forward and cracked against the chin of the elder, making his head bounce against the wall and slammed back into the ground. "She was the light of my life." His voice became deeper with each word he spoke, shaking the underground bass heavily. This time he kicked the elder's chest and the men grunted out a choke as he again crashed into the wall and back onto the ground. "She was my soul." He kicked the man's chest again and Danzo smashed into the wall once again and fell onto his face, almost lifeless. Naruto grabbed the back of the elder's head and lifted him off the ground, his eyes more than angry. "Your soul will be the price I pay to get her back. You should be glad your worthless existence would bring back my angel." The holder of the Kyuubi's chakra drove his fist into the man's stomach, never releasing the gravity hold around the older man's neck, and bashed the man's weakened body against the wall hard enough to leave a dent. The limp body of the former head of the now-defunct underground organization slowly lifted into the air and followed after Naruto as the teen flew out of the base towards the cemetery. As the air ripped against the cheeks of the teen, Naruto tapped his ear, mentally ordering the centipedes that wrapped around the tree to allow the wild animals of the forest into the base to eat up the bodies of the dead ninjas. Patch me over to Sai. Yes, my lord. A second later and he heard a low voice reply. Sai here, my lord. He could hear the root ninja fall onto one knee from the dry leaves that crinkled around him. I want you to kill the root operatives with you. Find as many as possible and kill them as well. Make sure you take care of their bodies. I give you 3 days. That would be more than enough, my lord Naruto. I swear on my life to complete this mission. He could hear the spy in Konoha draw a kunai from his pouch with a slick ping. Will there be anything else, my lord? Yes, I want you to remain in Konoha to look after my brother. When the time comes you and the other spy would meet up with those in the Akatsuki, but for now remain unsuspicious. He shot out of the exit of the organization, a sign for the wild animals to surge in and take control of the newly made feeding ground. His centipedes disappeared in 5 poofs of smoke, though Naruto kept flying with Danzo's body through the trees towards the Konoha graveyard. Your wish is my command, my king. Naruto disconnected. There was a niggling feeling in him that Sai was already taking care of his former comrades. The king skidded to a stop in the grave, tousling the ground and making a few of the tombstones tilt backwards at the force. Naruto didn't spare Danzo with a comfortable landing. The older retired ninja's body soon came after and crashed into a tree. Naruto looked at the crumpled form of the once proud leader of Root. 2 monkeys emerged from their hidden positions around the head of the King of Hell and grabbed the old man by his shoulders. Naruto's eyes narrowed as his Rinnegan saw the chakra network of the men. He nodded and the monkey gripping Danzo's right shoulder reached over and ripped out the eye hidden under the white bandages, making Danzo's grunt loudly in pain. Naruto nodded again and the other monkey ripped out the wood release, Hashirama arm clean out of its socket, leaving him with only one arm and heavily bleeding from his missing eye. Naruto frowned as he saw the seal lying in wait to activate after Danzo had died. Orochimaru was the one that gave Danzo the seal. He didn't care. Naruto faced the King of Hell head holding his sister's body and clapped his hand, the sound echoing around the cemetery like a death bell. He flipped through a set of 10 hand seals before ending with Ram. Outer Path, Samsara of Heavenly Life Technique. The same cloud of darkness that covered the head of the King of Hell swirled into sight again and a single demonic red eye looked down on Naruto as a pure white head with no nose but with small Rinnegan eyes rose up from the ground behind Naruto, who still held the Ram hand seal. The great mouth of the head behind Naruto unzipped and opened wide, leaning its head back as if it was cackling to the heavens. The monkey summons dragged the limp body of the councilman to Naruto. Naruto grabbed hold of Danzo's head with his left hand, releasing the hand seal to do so, and titled his head down to look into the eyes of the Warhawk. Are you afraid, Danzo? Before he could get a reply he took off his hand, ripping out the soul of the Warhawk with it. Not wanting to waste any more time, Naruto lifted the soul in his hand and threw it into the mouth of Samsara of Heavenly Life. The darkness above the King of Hell hummed in pleasure. Now that hit the spot. Give her to me. Naruto ordered and the Shinigami laughed. Fine, and he disappeared in a swirl but only leaving a small ball of light. All the monkeys and the drill-beaked bird bowed as the soul drifted downwards and entered through the top of the King of Hell's head. Naruto allowed the head behind him to return back to the underworld. The king slowly approached the head, his breathing getting more hurried but his legs nervous to keep moving him forward. It was an hour now and he knew her body was now fully healed. The mouth opened and the brightest, happiest purple eyes sparkled from the darkness in it. Tears slipped out of Naruto's eyes and fell down his cheeks as he saw them, also seeing the familiarity in her eyes as well. She remembered who he was. He stopped where he was and tried to blink out the tears in his eyes. He rubbed at his tears with his wrist and froze when warm hands gently reached up and held his cheeks. He looked up through his hair, trying to hide the wetness in his eyes, into a brightly smiling face. Why are you crying, bro? The girl that spoke looked to be about his age, with flawlessly pale white skin and straight long red hair that went down to her lower back, straight bangs over her forehead a bit above her sparkling, bright purple eyes and 2 big strands of hair curving down longer past her chin as a fawn-like fringe, framing her face delicately. Her facial features were just as he remembered them, albeit a bit more mature, a delicate nose that crinkled every time she was angry or nervous, and small lips that could stretch wide into a toothy grin. She wore a neat, armless red dress that flowed down just a bit above her knees, a dress that allowed her smooth skin to show in all its pale glory. Though she had no shoes, it didn't stop her from approaching him like before. Naruto's shoulders hunched and looked to the ground, sniffling. "I'm not crying." There was a tinkling giggle from the person. She knew how stubborn they could be. "Yes, you were." Her voice was smoother and a bit deeper than when they were younger, but still familiar to the Rinnegan king. Her body merely ran through the years she was supposed to be if she had been alive, 16 years old. She was exactly the same height as him with the same body type, the only difference being her waist-length straight red hair and her more feminine bodily and facial features. She gasped in surprise when Naruto wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly. "I missed you, sis." Naruko smiled softly and hugged her brother back, nuzzling her nose into his neck and inhaling deeply. "I missed you too, bro. So much." The siblings sat down on the ground, prompting the King of Hell to return back to the underworld, and chatted happily with each other for the rest of the night. Naruto still had something to do in Konoha before he had to travel to Hidden Rain, but for now he wanted to catch up with his formerly dead twin sister. That night, a large, true smile spread on Naruto's face, mirrored on Naruko's face, as they talked and talked with their fingers laced together. A heavy grumble interrupted them and the girl blushed heavily as Naruto snorted at her embarrassment. "I mean, you have been dead for 7 years." She puffed out her cheeks cutely and watched as he removed his right hand from hers and drew out a scroll from a segment storage seal on his obsidian armored wrist and dropped it onto the ground. He kicked it open lightly and there were multiple bursts of smoke. His smile increased at the wide-eyed look of his sister as she saw the assortment of food sitting neatly on the scroll, ranging from roasted turkey to beef, to salads to a large stack of cinnamon rolls. Never in her life had she seen this much food. "I brought this in case." She looked at him with teary eyes. "Thank you, bro. Don't worry about it." He let go of her hand and she pounced onto the food like a ravenous wolverine.